All right, so tonight's episode is titled, Are You In or Out? Last week we discussed the false gospels we tend to follow instead of following the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, we as humans, we're hardwired to strive for legalism. Whether spiritually or physically, we as a culture tend to sacrifice ourselves for the wrong things at times. Even if it means nights and weekends at work, we perform to get that raise or promotion. On the field or the stage, relationships are secondary to competing for perfection, so that we get the recognition we deserve. Everyone compromises just a little of their standards to earn acceptance from the right group of people, right? I'm guilty of it too. But if you notice, to succeed in our world by the world's standards, to achieve any goal that's worthy, there's always a cost. After all, nothing worth having is free. Also, think about it. Our culture is very transactional based on what is earned or deserved. Try to grasp God's simple act of justification. It seems almost too complicated to comprehend. You wonder, how can something so extravagant, like being seen as pure in God's eyes, actually be free to anyone? But I want to start tonight's message with a few questions. Have you ever tried your best but still fallen short? Whether it be in sports, school, work, relationships. Sometimes we fail simply because we're aiming for the wrong target. We're trying to achieve the wrong goal. And the Galatians, which is, we're in the book of Galatians, they had the same problem. They were trying their best to be spiritual and not spirit-filled. The gospel has never been about us and our efforts, but about the saving work of Jesus. So what target are you aiming for? That's what I want to ask you. What target are you aiming for? So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to unpack the gift of God's grace through His Son, Jesus. But real quick, let's do a recap or refresh, rewind back to last week's message, or the very beginning of the book of Galatians, of what's happening. So Paul has started a church in Galatia, which is modern day Turkey, if you don't know, and things are going great. The people there, they're excited for the good news they received that Paul told them about of the works of Jesus Christ. That Paul left Galatia to start more churches. But while he's gone, he kind of gets the word that things begin to unravel in the church that he started in Galatia. And that's where this letter comes from, which are what so many of the books in the New Testament are. They're letters from the apostles to churches or their disciples themselves. But while he was writing this letter, he begins to address what he sees as the problem. And the problem was that you had one group of people that were coming into this church, or that were part of this church, that were new to their faith. But a second group came into this church. Now, the second group was a little more educated. They had a history to them. That word is really whipping my tail right now. The Judaizers. I'm sorry. That's who we're talking about, is the Judaizers. They were a little more religious. And they began to have some kind of conflict. Which is, it's ironic. Can you believe that inside the church, our church, was it about, I did some math here, 1,967 years ago. Just ponder about that for a second. 1,967 years ago, they were fighting about the same things that we fight about today. What's going to be our culture? What's going to be our tradition? Really, it's this: who's in and who's out. So what we're going to talk about, that's what we're going to talk about today. So many churches today are still fighting about who's in, who's out, because of tradition, because of culture. And some of the stuff is kind of silly. But, it's still something that we argue about after, this long. So, think about it. You got, we're either an Afro-American church or a white church. We're a traditional church or we're a non-traditional church. We either worship this way or we worship that way. You are known typically for what you are against and not what you are for. Let me say that again. You are known typically for what you are against, not what you are for. And that kind of resonates with today's culture still. But one of the best things we have here in this group that we have right here, and any of those who are watching, is that we are diverse. We are a very diverse group. And we have found a way to keep the main thing, and that is the story of this book, which is God's grace. So last week, we covered verses 1 through 5. So tonight I want to pick up at verse 6. We're kind of looking at this book verse by verse to really cover everything. So if you have a Bible with you, if not, that's okay. You can just continue to listen. Open up to the book of Galatians. Be Galatians chapter 1. And I'm gonna read from there. It'd be verses 6 through 12. So Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Paul right there is basically saying, if you're preaching a different gospel, you can go to hell. I didn't say it. Paul did. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. So, how do we not make the same mistakes that the Galatians made? First we have to recognize what is real and what is fake. What's real and what's counterfeit. But to understand what is real or counterfeit, real or fake, you have to study what is real. So Paul said when it comes to your faith, don't fall for what's fake. He said it really specifically in verse 6. You are turning to a different gospel, which is no gospel at all. Now, what hurts about this is because you've been like this before in relationships. You ever get into a fight where you and your partner just, aren't getting along, and you say something along the lines of like, hey, let's go back to what we used to do. Or you start thinking, do you remember when it was this way? I'm sure some of us have been there and can relate, but that's kind of the journey that Paul takes this church on, is that he begins to go on in this whole story of how he found the gospel, about how he was just walking along terrorizing. He was everything you don't want to be. And if you don't know the story of Paul, it's you can find it in the book of Acts. He was literally knocked off his horse. He had this encounter with Jesus, and it changed everything. He goes back to the church in Galatia and says, "The teaching I brought to you is not based on men. It's not based on religion." He goes on to rant and say that all the things that the religious people say they have, I have it and I have more. He says, I can be legalistic. I grew up in the Christian school and in the Christian home. He said, I grew up following all the laws. I can flex and talk Christianese with the best of them. But I didn't bring all that. I brought the grace and the gospel message of Jesus. And what he says in all that is, I need you to get back to the gospel. So, like I said, we have to recognize what's fake, what's counterfeit. I kind of want to show y'all something. All right, and now I'm a fan of college football, and at one point in my life, I wanted to be a coach for some prestigious college. Coaches get to draw up plays and place X's and O's on a piece of paper and execute the plan. But what I'm going to do tonight is, I hope it helps if you're a visual learner, is basically the message that Paul was saying, or Paul was telling the church. And this is the gospel. So give me a second so I can get it all pulled up. That way I don't jack this up. So we're over here. By the way, none of these weird noises should be put in the published video. Alright, give me 1 second. We're almost share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody's able to see the paint thing right there. But what I'm going to do is draw an equation. And this is where it is. Let me see if I got it all right. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see it. And forgive me for my beautiful writing that I use with the mouse. Hopefully I have room. I'm going to have to start shrinking things. We're getting there, guys. It's slow moving, but it's important. I was actually about to make that a T, and then I realized that's not how you spell salvation. All right. First equation. Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. That's what Paul taught the church of Galatia. Now, I want to show y'all something else that might resonate with some of y'all. So let me write this a little smaller since I kind of see how the first equation worked. The Judaizers, or this other group, came into the church of Galatia and said, it's great that you know Jesus and you accepted him, but you still have to do this. And that was the false gospel that they were telling the Galatians. Jesus plus works equals salvation. Wrong. That is, I'm going to spell it out in big letters. Hopefully I spell right. Wouldn't that be embarrassing if I did all this just to spell it wrong? I mean, I did grow up in South Mississippi. But that's what this is. That's what the group of Judaizers were telling the Galatians, that Jesus plus works equals salvation, but it's really legalism. That's something we get so wrapped around as Christians, is we come to know Jesus Christ, and we feel like we have to do all these works with it to earn our salvation. But that's, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. But this is what they were teaching them right here, this bottom one. When really and truly the real gospel is Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. That is the gospel, the real one. And this one down here is the fake, the counterfeit, the dupe, if you will. So, like I was saying, Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Jesus plus anything equals legalism. So, excuse me, I was trying to catch up with my notes, my script. So, in the book of Galatians, that's what they argue about right here. And you talk about the works. But what you may do, or what we might do with that equation is Jesus plus blank. You know, Jesus plus denomination. Jesus plus what translation are you reading from? You know, you see these guys on TV, and that's why it's hard to talk about money in church or within any kind of Christian gathering, if you will. But, you know, Jesus plus tithing. You know, Jesus plus your quiet time. Jesus plus baptism. Now, those aren't bad things, and we're going to teach on those things. You know, we even celebrate those things. But those aren't saving things. You know, the good news of the gospel is good because it's based on the work that Jesus did, not what we have to do. You know, if you flip quickly to Romans chapter 10, verse 9, it says, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. No add-ons. Let me read that again because it's so important that you guys grasp that. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now, I need you to hold on to that because if you're like me, the enemy wants you to begin to doubt your salvation sometimes. And I'm here to tell you, if that's wrong, then I'm wrong. Because sometimes I doubt and I get worried. You know, sometimes the enemy likes to use fear in my life, but I have to combat that with the Word of God, with the truth. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, you will be saved. And like I said, no add-ons, no ifs, ands, or buts. That is it. That is it. So you got to recognize what's counterfeit or what's real or fake. And another way we can look at things and try to grasp God's grace is the gospel never has to be updated or upgraded. You know, the method could change, but the message stays the same. And just like the evaluation that I put up there too, you know, think of what we did in math in grade school. 2 plus 2 equals 4. But it's different now. You know, these schools, they get out of pocket and like to teach, what is it, Common Core? And they teach how to get the answer in a different way. The same answer, but it's silly to me, okay? And if you know me personally, I hate math. I can't do math. I got the South Mississippi public school education. Math just don't math with me, okay? But the beautiful thing about the gospel, and probably now after looking into this, is that I found a new thing that I can enjoy about math, is that the gospel is like math. Math doesn't change. It equals the same thing, and the gospel can never change. So look at verse 7 in Galatians. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell y'all, I'm going to go back to Galatians. But Galatians chapter 1, verse 7, it says, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. You know, you had these believers that were new to the faith, and they were so excited, they were passionate. And then you had this other crew that came in there, and they're, hey, I know you're all excited, but you want to be varsity? Let's take this back to high school a little bit. Everybody knows about varsity and cliques and stuff like that. You want to make the varsity Christian table. You want to sit at the varsity Christian table. So, think about this. Y'all remember letter jackets? I'm sure some of y'all probably do. I feel like all of y'all do. Who you don't have to answer this right now, but I mean, I had a letter jacket. Mine had like football and baseball on it. But these, talking about the second group, the Judaizers, we're going to call them the varsity Christians in this analogy or metaphor, whatever you want to call it. But these varsity Christians that are coming to this church, they got on theirs, and they got like a little 40 days they fasted. They got like a little $sign for all that they given to charity and to the church. And they're walking into this church of the Galatians, and they're creating these levels of Christians. I'm guilty of this myself, not being a varsity Christian, but I'll see these Christians and be impressed with some of the things that they've done. Like, they a big Christian. I don't even know what a big Christian is, but we're going back to the varsity Christians. And really and truly, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a varsity Christian. There's no such thing as a big Christian. You have either experienced God's grace and you're new creation in Christ, or you're not. Or you're not. Paul was saying, I don't know where they're coming in with these varsity and JV Christians, but that's not in the book. You either come to Jesus and experience his grace, or you haven't. What's so tragic is that in this culture that we're trying to do our best to change in the world of Christians. If you know people like I know people, you see them in baptism, you hear their story about how they accepted Jesus, and they're so excited about their faith. It's like they are living out the verse that we studied in the previous series, Salt and Light in Matthew, or Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You start to see them finding rest, and then what happens? So many times they get involved in church, and they get around these religious people, and they turn mean. They get discouraged. The next time you see them, instead of being excited, they'll say things like, what translation should I use? It's like, hey man, I'm so sorry I didn't make it to the Bible study. They just start doing things like that. And they've lost this joy that comes with being free in Christ. And instead they have turned inward, and it's been all about them, typically about their failures. Listen, you don't have to be perfect. Jesus already was. It's the story of the gospel. Living freely and lightly is not a result of works, but of grace. Our goal is not to be spiritual, but it's to be spirit-filled. It's not a got to, it's a get to. When you experience his grace, it goes from this to-do list to like, I can't wait to experience list. And that's part of the next thing I want to go into about being, it's okay to be passionate, but be passionate about the right things. In Galatians verse 9 of chapter 1, it says, as we have already said, now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. I would say that's pretty passionate language. If clear is kind, then Paul is oh so kind. Paul was passionate because he was defending the gospel. If there's some things you need to know what to be passionate about, discipling people, God's love, and the grace of God. Those are three very important things that you can be passionate about. Whatever ties into those three things, by all means, be passionate about it. We'll move a little forward into Galatians chapter 2, verse 2. And it says, I went in response to a revelation, and meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders. I presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. We don't want to run the wrong race and be passionate about the wrong things. As a Christian, you kind of have to sit back and ask yourself, am I passionate about the right things? Listen to what Paul says to his mentor, I don't want to say mentor. Maybe I put the wrong thing right there. Just listen to what Paul says to Timothy. Can you imagine getting to say this? And I want you to hear it firsthand because this is so powerful. But 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I want to be able to say that. I want you to be able to say that. We as Christians got to be able to say that we don't drift. We don't. Sometimes we might, but that's God's grace. That's God's grace right there. We're not perfect. Does anybody follow the Olympics? There's a story in 2004. A guy named Matthew Edmonds. If you don't know who it is, look him up. But this guy Matthew Edmonds, he did the 50 millimeter shotgun shoot thing. I don't know. He was a marksman in the Olympics, but this guy had multiple medals. He was the best that USA had. 23 career 4-time Olympian. Dude was top notch. He was him, if you will. But it came down back to 2004. It came down to the final round in the Olympics. He's winning by a landslide. He takes his last shot. Boom, bullseye. But here's the problem. He didn't win the gold medal. Why didn't he win the medal, T-Strong? I'm glad you asked. He hit the wrong target. He hit the wrong target. Instead of hitting his target, he hit the target in the next lane by him. So he didn't win the gold medal. So I want to end tonight with a few questions. And I really want you to think about it. What target am I aiming for? Jesus or me? Received grace or earned salvation? Or earning salvation? Transforming relationship or learned religion? The Christian life is centered around Christ. So which one are you aiming for? The answer is Jesus. Any other gospel is the wrong gospel. It's the counterfeit gospel. It's the fake gospel. If you catch yourself thinking and drifting towards your sin and all that's happened in your life, the way you have been separated, I'm telling you that's. I'm not telling you that's not true, but what I'm telling you, what the word in Colossians 3:3 says, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. All the things of the past are dead. You are now a new creation in Christ. So who's in, who's out? That's what that's what this boils down to. If you're still wondering which one you are, the ones that are in have received Jesus and are experiencing His grace, and they are experiencing a transformed relationship. It's a gift just sitting there, right there for you, saying, I want you to open this. His mercies are new every day. It's a key that you keep on opening. It's like Christmas every single morning. You get the gift of grace every single morning. You're not just saved once, you're saved every time. Every time you sin. If you have experienced His grace, and if you are resting in it, and you are living out of it, and you are living from it, it's not a one and done thing. His grace covers you daily. That's how you live freely and lightly. And when people trust in Jesus, what comes true of Him becomes true of them. There's nothing you can undo what's already done. In Galatians 2:20, it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Powerful. If that doesn't just fire you up, I don't know what to tell you. I want to read some lyrics from a song called The Blood. I'm going to read you some lyrics from the song called The Blood. It has never been about performance, perfection, or striving for acceptance. Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. It has never been about deserving or earning. It's a gift that's freely given. Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. Does anybody want to be holy, righteous, purified, and spotless? Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. Does anybody want to be worthy, forgiven, justified, really living? Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. So the last thing I'm going to tell you to do and kind of end on is if you got a notepad, sticky notes, something to write on, I want you to grab like a pen and a sticky pad or a notepad. And I'll kind of give you a second to do that because I want to have you do something. Also gives me an opportunity to drink some water. So if you have a notepad, sticky pad, something to write on, I want you to write down 3 words on it. And when you write these words down, I want you to place it in a convenient spot where you'll see it. Maybe it's on your desktop, dash of your vehicle, maybe even your bathroom mirror. Wherever you're going to see this thing daily is where I want you to put it. But I want you to write down these 3 words. All right? You ready to write? I am free. I am free. Because if you're like me, the enemy does not want you to recognize that. He wants you to see your sin more than you see your Savior. That's all I got tonight. So the last thing I want to say is thank you and praise God for His grace.